So I got a question from a friend if U.S. citizens can, become legal residents and eventually dual citizens of Cuba. And the short answer is yes. It is yes. Actually, any other country as well. But like most things in Cuba, the true answer is a bit more convoluted and complicated. So just a quick disclaimer before we get started. I did some research to see if anyone on YouTube talked about this topic, and I haven't found anything yet. So I figured I would do it for those who are interested, for those who happen to give a damn. Also, understand that majority of guys viewing this type of content are probably from the U.S., Canada, maybe the European Union. So the topic of Cuba can be a bit divisive for most of you guys, or some of you guys, especially Americans. So before you leave your comments about how shitty Cuba is or fuck communism or all of that, I'm just giving information on topics that typically aren't spoken on. I created this channel to speak on some off-brand topics and inspire you guys to think for yourself, regardless of my opinions on the subject matter. So that's the beauty of escaping the flock. You take the info, decipher for yourself. So without further ado, let's discuss how to become a Cuban. So prior to 2019, multiple citizenships in Cuba weren't allowed under the Constitution. That's really just on paper because for years, white Cubans have acquired Spanish citizenship due to their Spanish ancestry, and they held both passports. So 2019, there was a majority referendum vote that allowed for dual citizenship, and it was instituted and passed. Now Cubans can have two passports, and if you're not Cuban, you can have a Cuban passport without giving up your home country's passport. Dope. But there is a caveat, and there's always a caveat when it comes to Cuba. You'll soon realize that. But basically means you will only be a Cuban within Cuba. And that means you have to enter and exit Cuba with your Cuban passport, which is normal, right? But if you happen to get into some shit, the U.S. can't come save the day because you're only Cuban in Cuba. Now, there are really only two ways to become a Cuban, which is one, kind of like the U.S. You're born on Cuban soil, right? So you're born on Cuban soil, you're a Cuban. Or you have parents. Your parents, Cuban parents, sorry. Your Cuban parents could, have you in Canada or have you anywhere else. If your parents are Cuban, you're a Cuban. So the second one, and the one that applies to you, is naturalization. How you become naturalized, right? That's the big question. Well, first, you have to establish residency in Cuba for 5 years and understand Spanish. And after your first year, you have to make it plain. You have to state your desire to become a Cuban to the Cuban government. Now, the how-tos on that isn't necessarily specified, but it's suggested that you speak to the consulate in your home country to determine what's needed to, state your claim, your desire to become a Cuban. So we spoke about that 5-year mark. There's a shortcut. There's always a shortcut, right? So it's shorter from 5 years to 2 years if you're married to a Cuban or have children born in Cuba. So those are both options. And I think it's kind of weird that they don't tell you the number of days you actually have to spend in Cuba. But that's something you have to contact the consulate in your home nation and get, written documentation of, what's needed for you to meet that threshold. So before you become a citizen in Cuba, you gotta achieve that minimum. But how do you achieve, how you stay in Cuba legally for that long, right? It's only 3 ways. You can get a work visa, you can get a study visa, or you can get the join your family member visa, right? And depending on the type of subcategory that you're electing, because there's a ton, that total length of school or work contract, your time may be limited unless you're becoming a damn doctor, which is like 5 years. And you can do it for free, I might add, if you're interested. If you're interested in becoming a doctor in Cuba, comment below. I have people close to the family who are actually in Cuba and have graduated from the Cuban medical school for free, debt free. So if that's something you guys are interested in learning about, I could do a video on that. But all right, back to this. And the work option probably isn't feasible because the economy is shit. So you're probably not getting a job in Cuba. At least I hope not. So if you're single and looking for love, being married might be your best option, especially if you're bringing in USD or euros and looking for a Cuban wife or husband. I made a video about dating in Cuba, and I'll have that linked above. Now, just to clarify, the only way to claim Cuban permanent residency is by marrying a Cuban, or you have family, like a kid born and born and living in Cuba. So now, just to clarify, the only way to become a Cuban permanent resident is by marrying a Cuban, or you can marry a Cuban permanent resident as well, someone that's in the position that you're trying to be in, or you have a kid in Cuba, right? Those are the only ways to get like a permanent residency in Cuba. That's not to say you couldn't use one of those school or work visas to meet that 2-year or 5-year mark. It just will probably be exceptionally harder to find the visa that works for you. But you do the research, you figure out which one works for you. I think this way is the easiest way. But if you're looking to become a student, that's not a bad deal. And if you are able to get a job or secure a job in Cuba that will last 5 years, that's not a bad deal either. Well, the pay might be a bad deal, but you'll be able to achieve your goal. All in all, if you're looking to become a Cuban citizen, get a second citizenship, it's typically an arduous process for most countries, or extremely expensive in some cases where you're kind of in that pay-to-play system. Cuba is not necessarily like that. You just kind of have to do the grunt work to get it done. But depending on your financial situation, like you're bringing in good money, maybe you want a passport upgrade, hop around to other countries, or just love Cuban people and want to marry a Cuban. So you figure, hey, getting a Cuban passport to match what I got going on isn't a bad idea. This might be a good look for you. Either way, if you liked the video, please comment, subscribe. It's Escape the Flock. Till next time.